we're going to spend. We've got a few folks in the audience. My own assessment of COP26, I did not attend in person, is that at best we had a B- outcome. Some successes, many more partial successes or failures. Kuni, why don't we start with you? You had said in your response that you intended to talk about outcomes and also the Global Methane Reduction Initiative. So if you could spend a couple minutes on that, that would be very appreciated, I think.
Thank you, Bill. And I'm Kunihiko. I'm the ex-Japanese chief negotiator in the climate change. And I myself also didn't attend the COP6 in person physically because due to other constraints. But based on what I've been hearing, learning from the news, and also my ex-colleagues in the Japanese government, as well as also those within the European Union and so on, like Bill, I also would like to give maybe B- or B as kind of a score in terms of level of the success I see for the COP26. And it was quite nice, the touch upon the issues of 1.5 degrees is a long-term and super long-term a target for the atmospheric temperature rise and average temperature rise, as well as also the countries that started talking about the decarbonization even more serious, and also from some business a point of view as well. Even though major countries like mine, Japan, or the United States, or some other countries cannot join the kind of the abolition the coal fire plants completely by 2050 or 2030, because we're still using these, especially for the Asian term. That's something the European Union has suggested at the meeting, especially the chair presidency of the United Kingdom mentioned we have to cut the old coal fire plants by 2030 or something. It's not realistic because many countries in Asia Pacific, including Japan, have heavily rely on the coal fire plants. And most of the technologies used in Japan is a pretty a low carbon emissions technologies. Even we're just using the coal fires. So in that sense, my impression of the COP26 was negotiation is already done. I mean, negotiation process is already done. So whatever they came out from after the Paris is definitely an issues for the domestic or national implementation rather than internationally discussed or negotiated the details or nitty-gritties. So, whatever the negotiation teams or even the delegations came up with at the COP26 was a little bit far from the reality. So they don't touch upon the real businesses or actual energy mix or situation and so on, even in the myth or after the COVID-19. So everybody has a different kinds of the economy or economic style at this moment. So we need to take into account what the reality would be and what each of the countries has in mind in terms of their or his or her decarbonization strategies up to 2030 or 2050 or even beyond. So now we need to talk about some kind of dreams, which is some kind of the ideal situation talked, even discussed at the COP26 versus what has to be done in a real term in each countries in order to achieve their respective goals. Like for example, my country, Japan, has already committed to reduce the 46% reduction compared to 2030 by 2030, by 2013 to 30. And also the net carbon zero by 2050. So that has to be the strategize even with the business sectors, how we can definitely comply with that kind of international promises. So that's a situation in terms of the COP26. But outside of the COP26, maybe at the COP26, but in the kind of different venue, There are many, like, the outside of UN processes have achieved, including the Global Methane Pledge, because that pledge has attracted more than 100 countries. And these countries share the views that they need to reduce the methane emissions by 2030 by on average of the 30% reduction, also compared to 2013 level. So in that to 21 level, so means actually this year. So the 30% reduction sounds really huge, but the methane has the much larger global warming potential. It's 21 times more than the CO2. So if the countries can come up with the concrete plans, for example, working on the oil and gas sector and agricultural sector and the waste sector, and if these countries and even firms can come up with the concrete measures to reduce the methane emissions further, then the 30%, in my view, is achievable target. So that also set the kind of momentum for the countries how they can go forward, go towards the decarbonization world in 8 or 9 years time. So that's my impression coming from COP26 negotiation, as well as something outside of the negotiation. Maybe I think I'll stop here.
That's great. And if Bill's speaker's not working, we can trade one Bill for the other as a moderator. So Pina, give us your take on COP26.
Okay.
Bill, why don't you take over until I can get hooked in here. Keep this moving, and I hope to be able to join you as soon as I can.
That's great.
So off to a good start. Go ahead, and please maybe make sense to Pina. You go next, and then Bill, keep it on track with your remarks.
Great. All right.
Okay.
We read each other's minds.
Thank you. As I am not the government people, or today I think I'm one of the representative of private sector. I cannot assess the COP26 itself, but I think this kind of discussion or negotiation, international negotiation, is really important to continue. This time, many people said the COP26 is kind of failure, some success, but I think the important stuff is continue to discuss on this kind of matter. So keeping this discussion for us, I mean the private sector, it is the eye opener for this kind of issue. I think not only Japan, but also the worldwide. So this kind of activity make us keep watching or addressing this kind of issue. For instance, I'd like to explain or introduce some of our company's activities. Can I share my screen? Okay.
I'm fine with that. If you click on share screen, see if that works for you. But Bill may need to authorize it, which is a question mark. Oh, there you go. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Pina.
Okay.
So
I introduce just two examples. Our company Asteria is now in the midterm plan, and the first priority is sustainable among 4 key items like STAR. Then I do quick introduction on one of the action we did this year is CO2 carbon zero emission AGM, annual general meeting. So this has held 100% online, and also even the electricity of this AGM is carbon offset, and then virtually zero emission of carbon. And second example I like to explain is we did a radical decrease of the commute of all our employees. So this means decrease using gasoline and electricity, saving the Earth's energy. And we actually didn't decrease our productivity. 75% employee felt productivity gain instead, and among keeping 90% plus remote work. And also, as our company, we resulted record high profit since listed. So this kind of activity can be done for all company to help the carbon zero activity of the companies. So yeah, that's it. That's my quick explanation.
Well,
For kind of activity, I think the companies the intention is very important. If there's no discussion, international discussion like COP26, the companies are less careful about these issues. So I cannot assess COP26, but it is really meaningful because it is on the TV, on the news, and the private sector people are aware of it. That's my take.
Great. And to follow up on that, and Pina, I think you highlighted the important role of the private sector, and then Kuni had also mentioned that, and of course the kind of the dirty secret behind all these UN processes is that it's basically built on moral suasion, right? There's no teeth. So even if we had a super successful Glasgow outcome, the ability to enforce that is basically nil. And there are so many things to work out in terms of transparency, leading to accountability, leading to some sort of enforcement. The good news is the moral suasion is working to a large degree. And we see this through the private sector, not just in heavy industries and in manufacturing, but I think really advancing strongly in the financial sector. And that was, I think, a huge outcome of this COP. So we have the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, that falls trippingly off the tongue. And Mark Carney at Brookfield Asset Management in Canada was the U.S. Special Envoy leading that. And I think that is actually a huge success. So 450 financial institutions with $130 trillion of assets under management. That's really moving the needle. So that's a kind of, I think we need to say the framework and setting expectations on UN processes. We have to understand the inherent limitations with that. And the good news is the private sector is stepping up, as civil society is also stepping up. And within the framework, of course, I think there was a lot of progress. As you mentioned, Kuni, that the methane agreement, which is not exactly strictly part of the framework, but that's obviously huge. And we have like 100 countries signed on to that. Of course, there's some key countries missing, right? Like Russia. I think a lot of the GCC countries also not signed up because oil and gas, obviously huge. Another huge part is food and ag, which is really worldwide. And another opportunity set, I think, that entrepreneurs, investors, large companies, and governments can really get behind. How to kind of rethink food and ag. And then we have some famous advancements around the phase down versus the phase out of coal. And everyone's kind of hiding behind India. Like, oh, India said that. And the reality is there are a lot of people who find that very convenient that we're not going, as you were saying, Kuni, like, hey, a lot of Asian countries to pull the plug on coal from one day to the next, just not going to happen. It's not going to happen in the United States either. So we're still in the ramp down process. And I think that's more, looking at the reality. The deforestation part actually is something that I think is another highlight where we again had good support across the board, including in a lot of countries at the Earth Summit that I was dealing with when I was actually on the Italian delegation and then the remaining delegation back in 1992. The Malaysians were like, hands off our forests. And the same thing with Brazil, even though the host like, hey, we may be the lungs of the world, but we want to call our own shots. We have our own sense of manifest destiny. We see how all of the industrialized countries basically pillaged their resources, got wealthy. Now they're turning around and telling us not to do the same thing. That's inherently not fair. And it's a reasonable argument to have. But to see that Malaysia, Indonesia, China, India, and Brazil have all signed up to the deforestation agreement, which of course covers food and ag, I think that's a huge outcome from COP. Obviously, there's some missed opportunities, as we were talking about, both the inherent aspects of it and just kind of the maturation of the process of, again, as I said, going from transparency to accountability to enforcement. And that applies to even the private sector. So private sector companies making their commitments, hooray, that's great. But being transparent about that through reporting, and again, another advance is that we did come up with, reporting standards that are, evolving and coalescing. So that's good. But to have that, really be accountable through the government, the public sector, through civil society, that pressure still needs to be brought to bear. And I think all of this really means that the next COP in Egypt is going to be even more important. So we are kind of kicking the can down the road to the next COP. And we've done that actually structurally, saying, hey, there's so many things we have to kind of figure out in the next COP. So let's set that up. So it's very different from when the last COP I was at was COP21 in Paris. So I was all excited about that. And I actually was supposed to be in Glasgow, but I couldn't go for last minute for a variety of reasons, because I really saw that as bookending, Paris to Glasgow, coming up with the initial set of agreements, and then, trying to bring that to a firm conclusion, even with, again, another inherent challenge to the whole system with the nationally determined contributions is like, hey, every country can make their own decisions, right? There's no standard for that. There's necessarily no pressure to say what standards you should be meeting. So again, part of the fig leaf we had in Paris, that still continues. So there are these inherent flaws in the system, but I think we can still work with that. We still make a lot of progress. And the big thing, which is one of my major policy focuses, both in Western Europe and in the Americas, is circular economy. So I call circular economy is the free lunch for climate, where we can reduce greenhouse gases by 15 to 20%, either in a profitable way or cost neutral. And it was absent. It was really absent from the discussions at Glasgow. So that is something that we need to remedy for the next COP in Egypt. And I think this is a huge business opportunity, an opportunity to see that the gap that we have now between the Glasgow objectives and what we achieved in Glasgow, this is going to create pressure, I think, to look into how we can use circular solutions to address that. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that. But Kuni, I see you nodding. Tell me your thoughts about circularity and how that fits into climate.
Well, definitely. I also, together with the consulting company, I also have been working on the circular economy through the World Economic Forum as well. And especially in terms of waste management, to try to reduce the emissions from the burning processes and so on, that's also one of the key, I would say, the education opportunity for the society, because, we're pretty good at doing the burning things, but at the same time, also the processing the waste, but we have also technologies and method to reduce the carbon emissions from that one. That's also one thing. And also some other issues, we try to also promote the issues for the reuse and recycle, also the used things. And that's also we're also dealing with the leading, we means actually the companies and also even the Japanese government, and also I would say the local governments as well, leading initiatives for reducing the plastic waste that can be also found in the kind of the marine environment and so on. So that's also another thing, because creating the plastics and also the PET bottles and some other things also, are consuming lots of energy. And currently, without the nuclear options in Japan, that we're using lots of fire plants. means creates also lots of the emissions.
Right.
So if we can just build in recycle processes or even circular economy concepts for the economic activities, that also directly means we can reduce the carbon emissions and even methane emissions, from our lifestyle. So that's, I think, I think the circular economy is definitely one of the key elements we should pursue for in the business perspective.
Right. And then the amazing thing is that, we're so focused on energy, and yet energy is only 55% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to deal with the other 45%. And again, circularity is a great way to think about that. And the other thing with regard to Asia in particular is if you look at how most people live in Asia and how humanity has lived forever, it's under resource consuming conditions. And so we're using innovation to always keep those materials in play. So you don't, throw away a pot with a hole in it. You repair the hole and you reuse it, and you share resources. And this is where I think Asia in particular has deep insights, both from history and current practice, that the rest of the world, particularly the United States, Western Europe, we need to learn from Asia on how to be efficient with our use of resources and goods. And the problem is the opposite is happening. That the influence of the U.S. model of prosperity is dependent upon consumption is now coming into Asia. And so we see as people increase their ability to buy goods, they are buying those goods, and they're following the U.S. bad example of the linear economy, of they use the good and then they throw it away. And the whole world is trying to get to a small unit price. So we need to get to scale. We need to have manufacturing in places like China and Asia to get the costs down so then we can afford to throw them away. And I think we need to work the opposite. Say the function we should be optimizing is let's find the lowest cost of value provided. So instead of let's create cheap cars, it's let's create cheap transportation services. So moving into models such as transportation as a service. So even if I have an internal combustion car now that sits in my garage or is parked 95% of the time unused, and if I transfer that into or trade it in for a electric vehicle, everyone says, hooray, that's fantastic. But if it's still 95% idle instead of 95% used, that's a huge opportunity wasted, because it's transportation as a good, not as a service. And this is where I think that the real innovations need to happen on the business model side of things. Even like apparel as a service. And again, think of so many places in Asia that are apparel powerhouses where they are key to the manufacturing of clothing and footwear. And if we can shift the model into apparel as a service, we can reduce the amount of waste that has come out with fast fashion and so forth. But what do you guys see as some of the barriers to those transformations? Any thoughts? Oh, so actually, Pina, on the software side, this is where we have fourth industrial revolution technologies to track goods, understand where they are, the condition they're in, and how to create markets. So it could be traditional secondhand markets, or it could actually go back into how do we redesign a computer, a phone, a car, an appliance. So you have IoT sensors in there, and you say, okay, this part needs to be replaced. So versus replacing the whole device, or even sell like a washing machine as a service rather than as a good. Any thoughts, Pina or Kuni?
Yeah, for the wasting things, for the talking about software, the software is basically the improving that kind of situation. So the software, comparing to hardware, we don't need any real items to make or manufacturing. So instead, we can provide any functionality not using the hardware or materials. So basically, software is more, you can say, the more less the wasting using software rather than hardware. And then nowadays, we provide, as a software industry, we provide a cloud system. The cloud system get rid of real computer hardware in each company or each locations. That actually reduces the manufacturing and also the transportation kind of stuff. So that is decrease a lot of the wasting. So I think even for the nowadays technology, the computer will be outdated some years later. So that makes wasting stuff. But using cloud, they don't need, the company don't need wasting. And
right.
even that kind of stuff is technology driven, less wasting world.
Yeah, in fact, Pina, that is my most favorite example of a circular solution is cloud computing, where you decouple the computational service that you want from buying and maintaining the hardware, buying and maintaining the software. Everybody went, and also the cost of that decreases substantially. So now you have greater equity. So you can be somebody in the Congo and have access to artificial intelligence tools to run your business or run your village. So I think that's really exciting. And that is really my favorite example of circularity. And as you point out, Pina, we're decreasing energy use, we're decreasing material use, and you're kind of concentrating that into these data centers, which again, we need to pressure the people running and designing those data centers to be as thoughtful as possible. And the nice thing is that companies like Microsoft, they just have announced this past year that they have now 5 different circularity centers around the world to take the server blades and basically reuse them rather than basically send them off to Asia or Africa. And we know all the horror stories with the electronic waste there, which not only is a missed opportunity on the climate side and material side, but also has impacts on health and equity. Kuni, it looks like you wanted to say something.
No. I mean, but actually, that's also something related to the mobility, the part, because as you mentioned, 95% of the time, your car, they sleep in the garage, and that's the same situation for me as well. And here in Tokyo, it's among the 47 different states within Japan. We have the lowest the ratio, the ownership of the car now, because the young people are not interested in owning the car anymore. But instead, now we have the kind of the electric kick boats and some electricity kind of the bicycles to be shared. It's a kind of shared transport. So in that sense, actually, we don't the ride of somebody's car. Except the kind of a car share services, which is also subscription services by each a month. Everybody has to pay a certain amount of money, and then they can use a certain the hours of the car if they just in the park near the house or even offices. So that also help us to reduce the emissions from the automobiles. But at the same time, if we can just change the automobiles to the more EV side or even the hybrids or even it's a kind of a batteries. And then we can just, they also help to reduce the emissions from the mobility as well. And also Tokyo is a pretty in a big city and with lots of the population, but we tend to use the public transport as well because it's super convenient. So, that towards a sharing economy, but also a more eco-friendly the mode of transport. So that's what we are heading to.
Oh, absolutely, and that gets back to the mentality of transportation is a service, not like you're in Los Angeles where you say I am my car, and it's more of the status thing. And we actually have a comment here from Ananda talking about the projects working on in Japan for renewable energy, and I think there's an interesting link there. So. everyone's talking about renewable energy, and of course that's really positive to reduce greenhouse gases. And Kunihiko, you're talking about again EVs and looking at storage and so forth. But again, on the circular side, is we're about to put in trillions of dollars into the sector, but we also need to consider the circularity aspects of that for a lot of reasons. So there's the supply chain issues that we're all facing right now. So if China or others are restricting access to rare earth elements that are key for magnets and all these other things that need to go into renewable energy, if we can kind of close the cycle more locally, we're better off from a supply chain resilience perspective. But also we're going to realize if we start off from the very beginning to say how are we going to design the EV and the battery in the EV and for the wind and for the solar, every aspect of those needs to have a circular component to it. So when we're not creating future problems, this is how humanity works, right? We solve one problem, not thinking in a systems way, and we create other unintended consequences. Whereas now we have the opportunity to say, okay, let's actually really think out how renewable energy is going to unfold and what are the circular aspects of that. For example, in the battery, like if we have it as a modular design, rather than have all the cells like literally glued or fused together, and after a certain number of cells go bad, you have to take the whole battery out and basically chuck it. So why not have it modular so you just replace those cells that are bad? And again, have the battery as a service. So even if you own the EV, the battery could be a service. And so this is actually what you may have seen Apple is expected to announce in the next year or so, is their own EV would be one autonomous, although it's under still an ownership model. But the battery may end up being a service element rather than a capital good. And so we have a question from Ananda of looking at the gaps for renewable energy. How can we bring the cost down to make it more affordable in the developing country contexts? Anyone want to take that one? I can throw out an answer for Ananda. So again, this is kind of the good side of what I talked about before, of like the whole world is about getting the marginal costs down as much as possible. Is that we do have that scale mainly in China, for wind, for photovoltaics, and that has crushed the price for renewable energy. So that does open up things for emerging markets. But what I would also throw into the mix is saying if we can sell this as a service, so renewable energy as a service rather than as a capital good. And this is something that already is happening. For example, in fact, I was doing a modeling project of if instead of selling solar systems to households in France and the United States was this particular model, what if we just basically rent the rooftops and we own the solar equipment and we have an agreement with the homeowner that we will upgrade, maintain, basically, Pina, like you're talking about cloud computing, but have that same kind of cloud computing mentality for solar. So it reduces the onus on the household to say, one, I have to make this complex decision about stuff I really don't understand, like which solar system should I pick, and then I have to upgrade about, worry about upgrades or worry about, getting the money for the initial capital cost, and hopefully my utility has offtake agreements and all this very complicated stuff. Take all of that away, make it really simple, and I think that works very well in an emerging markets context where I've actually spent most of my career, primarily in Latin America, is if you reduce those capital costs of entry, that really opens it up. So you can have even state-owned utilities who do have access oftentimes to capital to go in and just have this as a service. And it looks like Ananda is particularly focused on Indonesia, which again has a lot of great resources for renewable, including geothermal, which is always the step child, it seems, in all of these conversations, because everyone's so focused on solar and wind. in addition to the obvious solar, wind, tidal things that you have in the archipelago. And it sounds like Bill is still figuring out his computer issues there. Any other thoughts on Indonesia and how Indonesia can move forward to reduce their greenhouse gases, like methane, like food? Think of food and ag, Indonesia, and methane, and how that relates to the agreement that you worked on, Kuni. Does anything pop to mind there?
Well, first of all, what Japan and China first time, discussed the issue of the methanation today, combination of they created the hydrogen also with the CO2, and we can create the artificial methane to use as a kind of a city gas. That doesn't contain some kind of GHG components in that sense, because we only create the H4, H2O. So in that sense, actually, that's one of the ways we can go in relation to methane. But of course, Indonesia is an oil-producing country, and also the natural gas as well. And if we can think about the reduce the methane emissions and the whole supply chain of oil and natural gas, that's another way of doing it. So maybe they're replacing for example, ammonia or hydrogen as a kind of coal-fire options for the LNGs and so on. That's also one of the ways. And back to the renewables, I mean, if we can just start up the renewable projects in a community base, not the whole nations, like, for example, Indonesia is really vast country, like a landside, also the scattered at the lots of islands. So it's always quite difficult to send energy and share energy among themselves. But if we can come up with the renewable-based, island-based, for example, each island has kind of a different a closed system within the community of the renewables. Like, for example, demand control, demand share, and demand shift. At the same time, it's kind of distributed energy issues. That's also gonna help us reduce the emissions from the use of the electricity. Even keep the electricity, even a renewable based oriented electricity price, we can just the affordable level. So I think that's one of the ways we can just pursue, because using some cases the friend company like Power Leisure is doing in Thailand, together with the local university, a whole community shares the solar, as you mentioned, Bill. All the buildings and the houses in that community has a PV panel on the roof, but that's provided by one of the electricity companies. So they just install the rooftop PVs and solar panels, and they will do the all maintenance and also the installation by themselves. And these companies always buy the electricity generated by the PV, and then they sell it to those who need it at a certain price. So that's also something that we can just use easily, track down the generation of electricity, at the same time needs of the renewable-based electricity among the same community using the blockchain. So that's one of the key technologies. Maybe Pina-san can just talk about a blockchain technology as well, but that's also we can just easily use in the electricity and energy sector, to reduce the actual cost.
Yeah, I think that's a great setup for you as well, in terms of the software that can run all of these distributed systems. And as Kuni, as you said, if we can solve problems at an island level, then we can solve them at a village level and have the same kind of autonomy and resilience, and yet still network effects. But again, Pina, comes back to you of how can we have software that looks at supply, demand, flows, security, and then as Kuni is saying, blockchain to track who's producing, who's using, and then making sure that the economics pan out there. Do you have some comment on that, Pina?
Okay. As I am the CEO of a blockchain consortium, largest blockchain consortium in Japan, I can talk blockchain over an hour. but yes, to make the story short, the blockchain is a infrastructure of a decentralized structure. So that means it is very good for the shared economy infrastructure, as we discussed today. And then this, I think, in general, I'm not so much familiar with the particular issue of Indonesia, but in general, the developing country have an advantage to do the leapfrogging of the technology, even for software. So many countries, even including Japan, it is struggling to adopt the blockchain because we already have stable systems in countrywide. But in the developing countries, there's not yet such kind of stable systems. So they can more easier to adopt such kind of new technology, advanced technology, like a blockchain. It's like, leapfrog is like Africa's mobile phone. Many of you know. So the developing company has many issues regarding carbon emission, but for the future, let's say 10 years later, thinking about 10 years later, the developing country has more choices based on the other countries, other advanced countries' experience, and to take the leapfrog to the advanced area. That can be done for this COP26 kind of issue, energy issues, carbon issues, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, the software can contribute.
Yeah, great. So I think we're almost at time. So maybe each of us can take like 30 seconds to think about what we'd like to see next year. So if we have the same conversation next year after COP27, what would you hope would be a result? Kuni, you want to go first?
Thanks. It's a quite difficult question, but I would say, based on something we have already agreed in the COP26, if the countries, a lot of countries can come up with the concrete plans, how they can achieve the 2030 goals or even like a decarbonizing goals, that will encourage the other countries, even the firms and businesses, to take the further actions towards the decarbonization. So now, the negotiation outcome is good, and also we agreed on the principle, but at the same time, for the nitty-gritties and the details, it needs to be clarified, and also even the kind of sought. So in that sense, actually, for the year from now on, when we all see in Egypt, it's a beautiful a resort city, and I hope that as many people as possible, we can see the concrete strategies and plans to be implemented towards the 2030 and further. So if that happens, I think we can still on the positive edge. Otherwise, we need to start worrying about the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Yes. And Pina, what would you like to see a year from now?
Okay. For the COP, what I like to see is first the continue of discussion or continue of COP. Not only 27, 30, 40, 50. So it is important to continue this discussion, focusing on these issues. And second, I think we need to discuss, or we'd like to discuss fairness more. So because the developing country always says it's not fair, because the advanced companies enjoyed the unlimited thing in the past. So there's a time difference of the developing of the country. So what is a fair situation, or what fair actually means? Such kind of stuff I like to be discussed more. That will generate more agreement on the COP result.
Great. Yeah, so I agree with both of you, and I think the fairness is actually very much tied to adaptation, which of course is we've talked about mitigation, how do we reduce, but we also need to talk about adaptation, saying we are going to have to live with impacts. Think of Bangladesh or in island countries, and so we need to help especially the poorer countries adapt to the changes we're facing now and will face in the future, even the most optimistic of scenarios. And of course, no surprise, I hope that we have circularity as a key part of the conversation at COP27. So I will definitely be there in Egypt.
Lovely. I would love to do so as well.
Yes. Well, I hope to see you both there. And by the way, I think Bill Bohnett is also going to be in Egypt. That's his intention too.
Oh, why? What? Oh, that's lovely. Yes.
All right. Well, great talking with you, and we'll probably see the recording and see what kind of impact that has.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you
very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice day.
You too. Thanks.